Welcome back to Oregon Public Retirement. I'm your host, Daniel Ryan, certified financial planner and IRS enrolled agent, as well as author of the book, Oregon Public Retirement. This is the financial planning playbook for Oregon public servants. In today's topic, we are bringing all of the pensions back together, and we're going to unpack the Individual Account Program, or IAP for short. So whether you're Tier 1, Tier 2, or OPSERP, whether you're general service or police and fire, you are in the right place. We are going to unpack everything you need to know about the Individual Account Program. The first thing that I like to do in unpacking the IAP is actually give a brief history lesson, because this usually will shock my Tier 1 and Tier 2 clients. It used to be, since 1946, that people in the PERS program would actually make 6% contributions into their pension. Then the pension would increase in account value and have a guaranteed 8% rate of return. Now, the pension has evolved over the decades, to say the least. And what happened in 2004 is that people no longer were making 6% contributions into their pension, but yet 6% contributions into their IAP. So when I explain why more and more people are coming into full formula instead of money match, this is why. You have not made new contributions to your pension from a Tier 1 or Tier 2 perspective for over 20 years if you're still working, which means that the account balance is going to be minimal, and thus that's why most people are going to evolve into full formula, which takes into account their salary and their years of service, not their account balance and their age. That's our history lesson. Now, 6% of your contributions were going into the IAP. Either you're making them, and you can see that on your pay stub, even though it says that your contributions are going to PERS or OPSERP, technically that is going into the IAP. Or your employer is doing it for you. We call that the PERS pickup. And so they might be making that 6% contribution so that it doesn't have to be deducted from your salary. They're going to do it like their healthcare benefits or other options and benefits that they provide to you. Now, that being said, I started with 6%, but since 2020, when Senate Bill 1049 came into effect, there has been a slight change, what we call the IAP redirect. And what happened is, if you're Tier 1 or Tier 2, and you made $100,000, just to give an example, then it used to be that $6,000 would make it into your IAP. But ever since 2020, $3,500 made it into the IAP, and $2,500 was put into what's called the EPSA, or the Employee Pension Sustainability Account. Now, that is a fancy word for not your money if you take the pension option, which most people are going to take the pension option at retirement instead of cash out their whole pension, right? They are not taking money out of your IAP balance. That means that whatever the new contributions are, that is where the money is coming and being taken out of. They're not going to your $120,000 nest egg already in there and taking money out. So that's good news. A lot of people get confused by that or worried about that. Now, what about OPSERP, folks? Your IAP redirect is actually smaller. So if you made $100,000, $5,250 made it into your IAP. The last $750 didn't, and that gets put into your EPSA. The concept is that Tier 1 and Tier 2 people, you're basically on the last decade usually, or maybe 15 years, certainly the second half of your career by now. And so thus you're going to make up time a little bit faster into this EPSA. And those of you who are an OPSERP, you might just be getting started. So they're only going to take that 0.75 of your salary at this time. This might change. I would imagine that as they continue, if they have to adjust the numbers for OPSERP folks, they might increase the heat as well. But that's just a little bit something for us to know. Now, what about voluntary contributions to the IAP? It used to be that you couldn't do anything and you just did the 6% and that was it. You can't make it more or less. But actually, now that they're doing the redirect, they're allowing people to do what's called a voluntary contribution. Be warned about these though, because these are after-tax contributions. That's not the same thing as Roth. An after-tax contribution to your IAP would be like a Tier 1 person saying, I have $3,500 going into my IAP, so I'm going to contribute $2,500 since that was not making it in there now. If they do that and that $2,500 grows, which we would assume it to do so, let's say it grows to $4,500. The $2,000 of investment earnings, that's still fully taxable at ordinary income rates when you retire. So actually what's happening is something called basis inside of your IAP. And that means that when you roll over your money, you better have a good tax person and financial planner who understands that you have basis in your IAP, and that needs to be separated, what we call separating the cream from the coffee, so that you don't have to fill out this 8606 form on your tax return every year for the rest of your life. You got to understand how these things work and how to get those back out so that it can continue into a Roth IRA going forward. But better yet, now that you've been warned not to make these contributions into the IAP, I do recommend that you make contributions to a Roth 403b or a Roth IRA or so on if you are in the correct income levels. Now, I don't give specific advice in a video, but it's something for you to consider that you might just increase your overall retirement contributions based on this knowledge, but probably don't want to do it in the IAP itself. It's a cool idea, but once you understand it, not so great. Now, that being said, what about your other options to choose, for example, your investments? It used to be that everyone who had an IAP until 2018, which is not that long ago, they were actually on the same investment fund, the same target date fund. Well, that is an issue because certain people are just starting their career and they need to take a little bit more risk. Certain people are about to retire and they need a lot less risk. So what they started to do about 2018, they started to change it into target date funds that were appropriate to when people would retire. If you're younger, you'll have more in stocks. If you're a little bit older and more seasoned, you might have more in bonds. But don't be considering everything as the same risk or less risk. For example, in 2022, the worst performing IAP fund was the retiree fund. And that's because it has so much in bonds. When interest rates skyrocketed and went from 0 to 5.5% in 1 year, that made the bond values drop. So you could actually change your investments once a year in the month of September, and you can basically choose from the pre-selected target date funds that they have available. There is no option for you to actually create different mutual funds or ETFs or stocks or anything like that. You just choose from the pre-selected options that they have already for the different target dates. So by default, if you choose one that has a farther time horizon, like 2065, that will have more in stocks. If you have a 2025 fund or a 2030 fund, it's going to have a majority of bonds. So that's how you can use that kind of concept overall and adjust your overall portfolio once you understand how the IAP works with your investing. Then you look at your 403b, 457 IRAs, and you adjust based on the IAP itself, which is that core foundation to your overall financial picture for a lot of people. What about when I retire? How do I get this money out? One of the options you have is to actually take the money from the IAP and do a direct rollover to an IRA. And that keeps all the tax deferral. We call this a direct rollover because it's actually a check made out to the Fidelity or Schwab or Vanguard, wherever the money is going to be held in custodian. So that way it's for your benefit, but this way you don't have that minimum 20% tax withholdings, which creates a really big problem for folks. In theory, you can also take the money out and put it into your bank account, but you will be taxed all in that 1 year, and that's probably not your best option overall. From there, PERS allows you to choose a pre-selected number of years to distribute the account. 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, lifetime option that they do a calculation based on how old you are at the time of retirement. And the concept is that if you had $120,000 in your IAP and you had 10 years of distributions, they would give you $1,000 a month for 10 years. But then the account would basically stop at 10 years and they would just write you one final check as a balloon payment and say, here's the last little bit and we're done. The issue that I find for folks is that in those early years of your retirement especially, you need flexibility. You already have pensions and Social Security. Now what we need is that flexibility to buy the car, buy a new roof. Maybe we're moving homes. Maybe we have a big health event. Maybe we want a vacation more in the front half of retirement, not in the back half. Those are all good reasons for you to say, I don't want the same amount of money every single month, whether I need it or not. I probably need something that's more flexible. And that's where you move it to the IRA, for example. The other side of this is also that you don't have very much investment flexibility as the retiree. They basically put it into the retiree fund, which is invested mostly in bonds and money markets, very low risk, but very low return. And you basically just sit there and it just keeps coming in consistently, but you can't change the investments. PERS is going to take care of that for you. So that's why for most people, we end up moving it into an IRA. And we plan our distributions, if you're before 59 and a half, to use your 403B or 457, to use that before you're 59 and a half if you're retired at, let's say, 52. And that way we know that the IRA, when the IAP moves to the IRA, you can actually just invest it appropriately and use the distributions from your 457, which doesn't have penalties if it's in a traditional 457 before 59 and a half. So that's how we coordinate all these different accounts to make sure for tax purposes, we're never going to have penalties or anything like that. So if you were 59 and a half or younger, you might also choose the option for the 5-year distribution with PERS. That's the only one where it starts at PERS, but you can still roll over if you wanted to within that 5-year period of time. Effectively, what that would look like is that $120,000 IAP. You would say, well, I'm going to take $2,000 a month over 60 months instead of 120. And about a year and a half, maybe, I'm going to switch it over to an IRA at that time. So you can absolutely do that option, but it's the only one where it can start with PERS and still be rollover eligible. The rest of them at 10 years and beyond, once you make that selection, it is a lifetime decision. That will never change. You can't get the money out in a lump sum or anything like that. You can't change the investments. It's really hands tied for the rest of your life. So really important that you understand those differences. Now, the last part that I wanted to talk about with the IAP is that it is vested immediately. That means as soon as you make that contribution, if you have $10,000 in the account and you're just starting out, you can technically get to all that money once you stop working for a PERS employer. But do not do that without asking for professional advice. Because if you take out that $10,000, sometimes people do this, then you have cashed out your pension eligibility completely. And you would have to start over and not have any of those years of service that you've already put into the system. You would completely start over and it would be like you never worked at PERS ever before. So instead, what I recommend to folks who are under 5 years and they're not vested in the pension, you probably want to just leave the IAP there until you've been gone longer than 5 years. And then at that point, you would be in a loss of membership status anyways if you didn't already vest in the pension. And that point, you might still benefit from taking the money out from the IAP, but really be cautious about this. If you are fully vested in the pension, you've been working for 5 years or more into the system, if you cash out the IAP, you have probably made a terrible error. And I really want to make sure that folks know what vesting is. I'll do a whole video on just that. But please understand that if you cash out the IAP, it has a symbiotic relationship with the pension overall. So if you've heard of people wanting to do that, make sure you warn them and let them know to watch this video so that we can help them out and maybe save them a big tax bill and also save them from cashing out the pension before they were really meant to. There are so many different components about voluntary contributions, the redirect, how to change the distribution amounts. But overall, I want you to remember that this is a lump sum dollar amount and it will run out of money. It's not the pension. So you have to invest it appropriately. You have to know when to do those investment changes. And overall, this should fit into the grand scheme of your plan in coordination with your pension, Social Security, your 403Bs, and everything in between. So until next time, happy planning.